Hello and welcome to Peace, Love, and Robots, a podcast about anything and everything and all that is in between. I'm your host, Jeremy, and this is episode number 28 for March 17th, 2021. And of course, it is St. Patrick's Day, everybody. I won't try to do an Irish accent because my Irish accent is terrible. However, it's St. Patrick's Day, so, behave responsibly. All right? Please, for all of us. It's officially been 1 year since the world changed for everyone, and I know that because my first day working remotely due to COVID was March 17th of 2020. And here we are, 1 year later. Longest 15 days ever. Is that curve flattened yet? As you know, this podcast is brought to you by the ads you hear at the beginning and end of the show. So if you can, please listen all the way through to the end. I'll forever be in your debt. All right. As you know, this podcast was started as an accountability tool. Eventually, I'll be able to say that word without stumbling over it. And not only just for my writing, but for my weight loss. So why don't I update you before I go any further? Drum roll, please. 20 pounds down. Yeah. You know how people, when they start to lose weight, are all about telling you how they did it? Like, it's some sort of special diet or a type of exercise, or they joined a cult. I mean, CrossFit. I don't want to be that guy. I'm losing weight because I have to, and honestly, I kind of want to now. Prior to my hospitalization, I found myself eating even when I wasn't hungry. And I don't know, I don't think I was overeating, but I would just eat to eat. It didn't matter what time of day or what I was doing, but I almost always had food in my mouth. And it was bad. That's why I'm in the situation I'm in. But I don't do that anymore. I eat a modest amount of food at each meal. And because of some of the restrictions that I have, like I have to eat low sodium foods and avoid eating too much potassium, so my choices are a bit limited. But I haven't said no to myself very often. I haven't cut everything out of my diet, with the exception of Diet Dr. Pepper. 2 months Diet Dr. Pepper free today. Yeah. I just eat a lot of salad now. And my breakfast 5 days a week is oatmeal. Yeah, I've become your grandfather. That's all right. 20 pounds down. And it turns out, when you cut thousands of calories out of your daily intake, you're bound to lose a few pounds. So if you're in the same boat with me, or at least you haven't had a heart problem, that's the only advice I can give you. Eat more salad. As for writing, how did I do? Drum roll, please. 1,600 words. I wish it were a bit more, but hey, that ain't too shabby. I was driving home last week and I had this idea. It's one of those ideas that sort of stuck with me. These things usually hit me when I get in the car to drive home from work. I don't know why. I just decompressing, my mind started racing, and this was no different. I got in the car and boom, flies into my head and I just can't escape it. I had to do a few errands before returning home, so I was walking around the grocery store writing in my head. You ever do that? Do you ever write in your head? By the time I got home, I had the entire bones of a story in my head. Premise, beginning, something in the middle, and the end. And then I had to do some home stuff, like help with dinner, get the kids to bed, all of that fun stuff. So 5 hours after it first popped into my head, I sat down to write. I scratched out the log line, a loose outline, and banged out the first 400 words or so. But by then it was after 11 p.m., and I really had to hit the hay. Remember, I've become your grandfather. But that's how life is when writing isn't your full-time job. You have to sacrifice a bit, you have to take your time, and most of all, you have to offer yourself grace when you can't do as much as you would like, and you accept the little victories. And I had a victory, with more to come. This week, I want to talk about something near and dear to my heart, comic books. I grew up a bit of a comic book nerd. Yeah, that's probably not surprising. I didn't have a long box of comics or anything, but I remember going to the spinner rack at the local drug or grocery store and buying whatever caught my eye. I wasn't really brand loyal either. I was just as likely to buy a copy of Booster Gold as I was Spider-Man, especially if the cover jumped out at me. Once I hit high school, DC had killed off Superman and broke Batman's back. Spider-Man had been replaced with a clone, and Magneto had torn all of the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. Comics were in their golden age. Well, not really, but they were their heyday, and I was all over it. These days, I don't buy a lot of comics. Now, I have a few long boxes in my attic, and under my desk I have one that's reserved for unread books, and it's full. I stopped buying books regularly, I think around 2 years ago, and I don't really intend on buying them regularly again. But no promises. But you can't escape the world of comic books any longer. Marvel movies are everywhere. The Snyder Cut of Justice League is about to drop on HBO Max, and the average person on the street can now tell you who Tony Stark is. This was unheard of when I was a kid, when the only Batman people knew was either Adam West or Michael Keaton, and nobody knew who Iron Man was. In a way, it's kind of cool. You can finally be a nerd in public. You can wear that Flash t-shirt and people know what you're repping. Being a nerd was finally something to be proud of. But conversely, we now have to share the things that we love. Now that kid who beat you up in middle school is posting on Facebook about his favorite Marvel movies and wearing a Captain America t-shirt. That same girl who laughed at you for reading a copy of West Coast Avengers is tweeting their theories about WandaVision and her excitement for Falcon and Winter Soldier. So yeah, it's tough. So today I was discussing the superhero bracket in my favorite Facebook group, Bracket of Champions, and I lamented, half jokingly, that all of the people who think the Marvel Universe started in 2008 are going to ruin it by voting for Loki over great characters like Magneto or Mystique. Of course, someone responded. That was kind of the hope when I made the comment, with a winking Loki gif, and I responded by asking if they believed that Stan Lee created everything on his own. Then I was accused of gatekeeping. Yeah, if you don't know what gatekeeping is, let me give you a quick and dirty definition. It basically means that any fandom, whether it be comic books or anime, well, they have a specific group of diehard fans that look down on any new fans, like hipsters. Yeah, I liked Wolverine before it was cool. Actually, it was always cool, like Wolverine. Maybe not. I gotta admit, I took that accusation personal because, first, I was half joking when I asked those questions, but secondly, it's really not a bad question to ask. If you showed someone a picture of Stan Lee, anyone, a random stranger or your grandmother, I guarantee they'll be able to name him. But what about Jack Kirby? What about Steve Ditko? I think we all know the answer to that question. Perhaps my tactics were a bit harsh, I can admit that. I could try better next time. But I want to help my fellow old-school fanboys out and help the newer fans out as well. Let's do what we can to educate newer fans. Take them under our wings. Point out that, yes, the U.S. agent did exist in the Marvel Universe and took over for Steve Rogers for a brief time in the 80s. We can tell them all about the changes that the industry went through in 1985 when DC published The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, and how confusing DC continuity was before that. We can also educate them on who really created the Marvel Universe, and how Stan Lee was merely a cog in that machine. I've talked ad nauseum about this with friends, but I find it surprising when I mention Stan's many flaws to newer fans, because they're shocked and they often balk at me as if I had insulted their grandpa or something. Stan Lee was a grifter. He was a con man, and he conned his way into the American psyche so much that his partners, and I would argue the majority creators, in the genesis of the Marvel Universe are barely known by the public at large. Most noticeably guys like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. For decades, there have been arguments about the origins of the Marvel Universe, and the Marvel method of creating comics and just who wrote the stories that we saw on the page. The Marvel method, of course, lends itself really well on the strength of the artist, who would draw the book and the story before there was ever any dialogue or captions, and then the writer would fill in the blank spots. Of course, because the words were written by Stan Lee and the outlines for each story were allegedly written by him, the argument can be made that he was responsible for the direction of Marvel Comics from a storytelling standpoint. And as a writer, I would naturally be inclined to agree. But I don't think so in this case, because the artists in question were incredible storytellers in their own right. And once they separated from Stan, they continued to tell stories that were successful, like Kirby's New Gods for DC and Ditko's Question for DC, as well as his own creator-owned books. My point is, I don't want to bury Stan Lee, but he seems to get all of the press, while his collaborators disappear into the back bin of history. Stan lived off of the stuff he worked on in the 60s and never really did anything after that without the Marvel name on it. He used to say that he always wanted to write the great American novel, but with all of his success, he definitely had the time and means to do so. But did he? No. So am I gatekeeping when I talk about Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko or how much of a tool Stan Lee was? No. I'm just trying to set the record straight. All right. I think I'm done. My blood pressure always seems to go up when I talk about this stuff. I know it's kind of lame. But what do you think? You can tell me what you think just by sending me an email at peaceloveandrobotspod@gmail.com, or you can leave me a voicemail at 585-371-8986. That's 585-371-8986. When I hear from you, I just might share it on the X episode, so just remember to keep it clean. And if you're a fan of pro wrestling and you're tired of the same old wrestling podcasts going all over the angles and the heel turns and the road to WrestleMania, well, I have the perfect show for you. It's none of that stuff. It's called Wrestling Makes You Thinks. Makes you thinks? No, it's Wrestling Makes You Think. It's three guys, a robot, and random topics about pro wrestling and what they make us think of. It's a good time. And if you're so inclined, feel free to rate, review, and share the show. You are the wind in the sails of the good ship Vox Robotica. Without you, I would just be yelling at a wall, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. Peace, love, and robots. Just like hockey, we've been making dentists rich since 1875.